All right, Krzyzewskiville, the name of the tent city that would pop up in front of Cameron Indoor Stadium before Duke basketball games, and how it is that I ended up becoming a full-on Cameron crazy. So to do this, let's take a step back. First off, when I went to Duke, I had no idea what I was getting into. As you get to Duke, hey, my name is Kevin, nice to meet you. Where are you from? What are you studying? Oh, why'd you decide to come to Duke? It felt like, and this is gross exaggeration, but this is what it felt like. It felt like 90+% of people were all like, basketball. Whereas when they would ask me, I was like, well, they have a skydiving club, of course. so already I was definitely the odd person out at this point. But and also, I did not like basketball, right? I was a soccer player, track runner. This whole thing with people in your face, waving their arms, getting in your way, not being able to run and sprint. I didn't get it. It didn't register with me. Well, after 4 years, obviously I drank the Kool-Aid or something, because here I was camping in front of the stadium for 2 months in order to get into a basketball game. So how does that happen? Why are you camping to get into basketball games? So you need to understand a couple things about Cameron Stadium to get that. It is a massive home court advantage. The stadium itself seats, I want to say 6,000 or 9,000 people, I can't remember. But the students, there's a limited student section that's actually the bleachers down on the court pretty much. And I think, I'm ballparking these numbers, I think I remember people saying it was like something like 1,500 to 2,000 students. Now, the perception of Duke is that it's a lot bigger than it is, but it wasn't. There were about 4,500-ish undergrad students, and then there was also a section at the end of the court for the grad students. But anyways, now you can kind of see the dilemma. There's over 4,000 students, but there's only seats for 1,500. So how does that work? How do you, when basketball is as popular as it is, and 90+% of people are all there because of basketball, how do you facilitate? How does it even work? Well, let me tell you. This is where Krzyzewskiville came from. And there's an entire rule system that governs how a person can get into a basketball game. Now, the rules change slightly each year, depending on the year. And by my senior year, which is, we're just gonna ground all this in my senior year and kind of explain to you how the rules work, but also because that particular year was there were a lot of other things that happened that year that were fun. So, first off, the way it works is you are allowed to set up your tent. That's right, tent. You're allowed to set up your tent up to 10 days before a game starts. You are allowed to have 15 people in your tent. At all times, 24/7, there has to be a person in your tent, and they have random tent checks. If you're not there, if a person is not in that tent or close by to check in, then your tent gets bumped to the back of the line, and you may no longer get into the game depending on how many people are there. Especially that year, you would not get in the game if you were at the end of the line. So 10 days beforehand, 15 people per tent, 24/7 random checks. Somebody always has to be on duty. Then the last 72 hours before the game starts, you have to make 3 of 5 random personal checks. As long as you got to juggle that with your schedule. Basically, it becomes everybody's in Krzyzewskiville the last 72 hours before the game until they get their 3 of 5 personal checks. As much as possible, juggling it with their classes and everything like that. Once you make 3 of 5 personal checks, then you can line up for the game. We lined up for the game, I think it was about 3 hours beforehand, and then they let you in about an hour beforehand, where you go in onto the bleachers, and the bleachers are standing room only. There's no air conditioning in the building. It is insanely loud. The students are literally sitting on the court. I mean, when I would go down to get ice cream, I would walk by and look up at Tim Duncan as I would walk by to go grab my ice cream, right? So that's how close you are when you're there. And so that's kind of how the rule system worked in order to get into a game. Now, the interesting thing is, in any given year, one of the biggest games is always Duke UNC. That's the rivalry. That particular year, the UNC game, the home UNC game, because they flop it, happened to be the end of February. It's like, I believe it was February 28th. And if you looked at the schedule, there was no home game that was more than 10 days apart. So we realized that when you set up your tent for the first game, or if you set up your tent for the first game, that would potentially be your spot in line for the entire season. And so the minute we realized that, a bunch of us went back early. We went back before Christmas break was over. We set up our tents, kind of got our spaces secured in line. That was on January 3rd, I believe it was. We started sleeping in front of the stadium. And literally that's it. That's how I ended up sleeping in front of the stadium for 2 months. Now it gets interesting. And you're out there in the rain, the cold. You have 10 to 15 people in your tent. You're juggling their schedules, making sure somebody's always there. All of that, and all your classes and studies and everything. Right, studies. So why we went to college, right? Anyways, at some point during this period, I realized that my dorm was close enough to Krzyzewskiville that with a little bit of help, audio, boosting, I might be able to hear the tent checks from my dorm room. Now, it's interesting. I know I've seen a very interesting stat for Duke back then was over 90% of students stayed on campus all 4 years. It was just kind of part of the culture. We were all always in it together, and it was one of my favorite things about going to Duke. Now, which is why I still had a dorm room my senior year. And also, the rock climbing wall, anything like that. So anyways, I hopped online and I ordered one of those sports audio dishes that they used to use on the sidelines at football games to capture like the tackles and the grunts and everything that would happen. And my thinking was, if I could wire that into my computer, amp it, drop the background noise, I might be able to hear the personal checks or the tent checks, because they generally use a megaphone. And so I ordered this thing, wired it all up, got it all connected to my computer, and it worked. It worked. So I could sit, and it was still nerve-wracking, because if your computer shut down or anything like that, and you missed it, and all the people relying on you, that would be really bad. But bottom line is, it worked. And so I basically had another tent in my dorm room, and I would come back to my dorm room, and there'd be 10 people sleeping in my little dorm room, because it was snowing outside or pouring freezing rain or whatever. And it was absolutely miserable, but we could all stay dry thanks to this satellite dish I had connected to my window that was pointed at Krzyzewskiville. They would call the tent checks, and we would all go hucking, banging on doors as we would go, tent check, tent check. Everybody run down, make a tent check, and roll back to our regular scheduled program. Now, the other thing that was interesting about this particular year is, after sleeping out in front of the stadium mostly for 2 months, literally the couple days before the final game, Duke UNC, I got a call and I had to go to Utah for a job interview. And it meant, not only did it mean that I might not even make it back for the game, but for sure there was no way I was going to make any of the personal checks. And so I went and talked to the line monitors, and they were very cool. They basically said, if you can make it back, we've got your personal checks taken care of. Make sure your tent checks are good, make sure your crew is good, but we'll get you taken care of if you can make it back. So I book it to Utah, I fly to Utah, do the job interview, potential rest of your life type stuff, and then right then, at the same time, a massive snowstorm hits Utah. 6 feet of fresh powder. And I guess the interview went okay, because the company invited me to an all-expense, paid ski weekend with 6 feet of fresh powder. I loved to ski. That was huge. So on one hand, I have rest of my life, 6 feet of powder, skiing, etc. Or I can fly back to, an epic basketball game that I've been sleeping in front of a stadium for 2 months for. Yeah, I went back to the stadium. Okay, so I was like, thank you, but I can't. I've been camping for I gotta go back to this game. I booked the first flight I could, got back, landed at the airport, drove straight from the airport in a taxi straight to the line. They were already lined up for the 3 hour, just that 3 hour period beforehand, kind of starting to walk in, rolled in the line and made it into the game. And thank goodness I did, because it was like one of the craziest games, one of the most insane sporting experiences I've ever been to. Duke was down by 16 with less than 14 minutes to go, and the team dug deep, and Cameron came alive, and the whole place just rocked, and Duke clawed their way back and won that game. And you can see, I've actually found some footage. This is me in the bleachers. You can see that we had just epic seats at midcourt. Great spot just to watch this whole thing go down. And by the way, when you come back from something like that against your rival, this is what that looked like at the end of the game in the stadium. So, bottom line, totally worth getting back. I'm so lucky that I was, able to, everything aligned that I was even able to make it back. And that is kind of how Krzyzewskiville worked, how it worked to get into games and things like that. And like I mentioned, I kind of wanted to record this, or maybe I didn't mention, I kind of wanted to record this as part of a thank you and a nod to Coach K, when he retired. Because just amazing individual, huge impact on Duke. I did not have many interactions with him. One that I did have, though, that I remember, he kindly asked me to stop throwing his basketball players out of airplanes, which was awesome. And then another one of my favorite stories from that same time period, after sleeping in front of the stadium for months, one day towards the end, just before the UNC game, a pickup truck shows up. And in the back of this pickup truck, the entire bed was filled with pizza, and you have a bunch of college students who are huddled around these, fire barrels. It looks like something out of an apocalyptic game. We're all huddled around with their tents and these fire barrels, and this pickup truck full of pizza shows up, and Coach K had delivered pizza to all of Krzyzewskiville. And so that is how I found myself and became brainwashed and drank the Kool-Aid to become a huge college basketball fan. How I ended up becoming a Cameron Crazy, grew to appreciate basketball and all those things. This is also why I cannot go to your basketball games, Rascal, because I would be that dad. I would be on the side. I would be yelling at the ref. I would be yelling at the other team. I would be heckling people. I would be yelling at our players. You would just be sitting there going like this. I don't know this dude, which is why I'm not allowed to go to your basketball games. And it's all because I became a Duke fan and a Cameron Crazy. And that's where my passion for basketball kind of developed and came from. And so, just a general recap, and also, like I said, a thank you to Coach K for being a huge part of the Duke culture and just all of it. So, hope you enjoyed this one. I will catch you all on the next one. Later.